At my mother's 84th birthday dinner, my younger brother told me I had always been the help. He said our father just never had the heart to tell me. He said it quietly, out on the back porch, holding a folded paper napkin, and then he went back inside and had cake with everyone else. I stood out there a while, looking at the maple our dad planted the year Denny was born. Then I went in too, and I complimented the cake, because my mother made it and it was her birthday. People hear that part and they want to know if I blew up later, in the truck, at home, somewhere. I didn't. What I did instead took 31 days, one rubber stamp, and a one-page form most people have never heard of, and by the time Denny understood what had happened, it had been finished for months. I want to tell it in order, because out of order it sounds like luck. It was not luck. It was paperwork, which nobody in my family ever respected except me and a woman named June, and I suppose that turned out to be the whole story. My father was Emmett Doyle. He tore off his first roof at 15 and started Doyle and Sons Roofing in 1971, when I was 6 and Denny was 2, which tells you something about the man's confidence. Putting in Sons on the sign before either son could lift a bundle of shingles. We grew up in it the way some kids grow up on a farm. Summers on tear-offs, Saturdays loading the flatbed, winters sweeping the shop and painting ladders. Dad had sayings the way other men have opinions, and the one that matters here is the one he said every single time he renewed the company's license. The name on the license is the name on the hook, meaning when a roof fails, the state doesn't come looking for a company, it comes looking for a person. I should explain that because it's the part most people don't know, and everything that follows turns on it. In our state, a roofing company doesn't exactly hold its own license. A person does. The company operates on the license of what the state calls a qualifying party, somebody who logged the years on the roofs, passed the exams, and agreed to be the one on the hook. Dad was that person for the first 20 years. In 1992, he drove me to the exam himself and waited in the parking lot with the radio on, and when I came out, he shook my hand like I'd been ordained. From that day forward, the company ran on my name. 32 years later, it still did, and I would bet money that nobody but me had thought about that fact in a decade. The split between Denny and me settled early, and it seemed fair for most of our lives. I ran the work. Estimating, crews, the roofs themselves. Denny ran the front, sales, lunches, the Chamber of Commerce, remembering the name of every building manager's wife in 3 counties. He was good at it, genuinely good, and I want to say that plainly, because most of what I'm going to say about him from here on is worse. Dad used to tell people, "Your brother sells the roof, Walt keeps it on." He said it at cookouts, at the supply house counter, at Denny's own wedding reception. I always heard it as a compliment to the both of us. I have come to understand that Denny heard it differently every single time. My wife Carol died in 2019. I bring her up for one reason. Years before any of this started, she told me that Denny counted my paychecks, that he watched what I took home the way some men watch a neighbor's boat. I told her that was unkind of her. I owe her an apology on that one. The shop sat on the east end of town, cinder block, with a pegboard wall where Dad had painted the outline of every tool, so you knew what was missing by the shape of the empty space. The whole building smelled like coffee and asphalt, which I understand is not a smell anybody misses, but I miss it. June Pelletier kept the books from 1993 on. She kept a dish of butterscotch candies on the counter that nobody ate except the parcel driver, and she kept my father's one office rule long after he was gone. Every paper that leaves this office leaves twice, copies of everything. Dad had been burned in the 70s by a builder who lost a contract on purpose, and for the rest of his life he treated the copy machine like a sidearm. June never once broke that rule. Remember that. It's load-bearing. Our biggest account, the one that kept the lights on, was the school district. 26 years of it. Patches, sections, full tear-offs, gymnasiums. The relationship ran through the district's facilities director, a man named Herb, and I'd guess I have stood on more rooftops with Herb than with any other living person. There's a Thanksgiving in there somewhere. An ice dam over the middle school kitchen, the two of us up in the sleet while our dinners went cold at two different tables. That kind of thing never shows up on a spreadsheet, but it decides where 26 years of work goes. And the district had a program coming. 4 schools, full re-roofs, spread across 3 summers. Herb had been talking about it for 2 years. It was the kind of contract that sets a company up for a decade, and everybody at our shop knew it was coming the way you know Christmas is coming. Cody came into the business about 3 years before all of this. Denny's boy. Business degree, a vest he wore indoors, a laptop covered in stickers. I want to be fair to him because some of what he pushed was right. We were slow on our invoicing and our website looked like it was built in 2006, and he fixed both of those things. But he said the word legacy like it was a diagnosis. He called the trucks assets and the men labor, and once, in a Monday meeting, he described what we do as the roofing vertical. Dad would have sent him up a ladder in January. Denny looked at him like he was the future, which, as it turned out, was exactly the plan. The cracks were small, and I missed most of them. Or I saw them and filed them where you file things you would rather not look at, which is not the same as missing them, and I want to be accurate about my own part in this. The insurance renewal came through a broker I'd never heard of. A fuel receipt turned up in truck 4 with a card printed with a company name that wasn't ours, Doyle Building Group, LLC. When I asked Denny about it, he said Cody had set up a marketing entity for tax purposes and the accountant had blessed it, and I nodded and went back to work. Because it was August, we had 4 roofs going and a man out with a broken wrist. And the truth is you can get a lot past a busy man just by staying boring about it. In September, they retired June. I say they because I found out at her cake, grocery store sheet cake in the break room. A card everybody signed with the same blue pen. Denny gave a little speech about new systems and 30 years of faithful service. June looked at me across that break room for about 1 second, and there was something in her face I didn't have a name for yet. She took her butterscotch dish home. She left the office copies where they had always been. What else she took home with her is a different matter, and we'll get there. In early October, I found a folder on the copier for a bid I had never priced. A medical office park, 2 buildings. Our letterhead, except it wasn't. Same eagle Dad picked out of a clip art book in 1988. Same phone number, but the name across the top said Doyle Building Group. The estimate inside was signed by Cody, and on the second page, on a line marked qualifying party, was my signature. I stood at that copier and looked at it for a good while. It was mine, and it wasn't. It was the stamp. In 1998, June had a rubber stamp made of my signature because I was on roofs all day and permits needed filing while the county offices were open. It lived in her top drawer for 25 years, and it got used the way she used it, on papers I had already said yes to. It saved everybody a lot of driving, and it never worried me. The same way a spare key under a flower pot doesn't worry you until the first time you really think about it. I carried the folder in and asked Cody what it was. He wasn't guilty about it. He was mildly irritated, like I had asked him to explain email. He said the new entity needed a licensed party on file while its own paperwork went through, that it was a formality, and then he said the sentence I have probably replayed 1,000 times since. He said, "You were on a roof, Uncle Walt. You'd have signed it anyway." Then he asked if he could keep the folder. I gave it to him, and I walked out and sat in my truck for a while with my hands on the wheel, and then I did something I had never once done in 30 years of working 40 feet from her desk. I drove out to see June. She lives past the fairgrounds with an old dog named Duke and a kitchen table with a plastic cloth on it, and when I told her why I'd come, she did not look surprised. She poured coffee. Then she went back to her bedroom and came out with a manila folder with my name on it in her handwriting, and she said, "Your dad told me every paper leaves twice." Back in June, Cody told me to shred my carbons. So you can say I retired on principle, or you can say they retired me 2 weeks later and the reasons were invented, Either way, and she slid the folder across the table. Inside was a copy of a state license application for Doyle Building Group, LLC, qualifying party Walter E. Doyle, my stamped signature on the line, dated a Tuesday in May that I could prove I had spent in Rochester with my knee doctor, notarized by a name I have never met to this day. Under that were invoices. The co-op, the medical park, the implement dealer, all billed under the new company since midsummer, on paper that looked like ours to anybody who wasn't squinting, and under those a vendor packet for the school district, half filled out, waiting its turn. June watched me read the whole stack, and then she said the only angry thing I heard her say in 30 years. She said, "Emmett named that company for both of you." I drove home the long way, and I want to be honest about what I felt, because this is the part people get wrong when they imagine it. I wasn't hot. I had been hot at the copier. By the time I left June's kitchen, I was something I don't have a better word for than interested. Very interested in the details. That Friday, Denny called me into the conference room. Cody turned his laptop around to face me, which is how I learned there were slides. The words on the slides were the kind that don't sound like anything. Legacy entity, orderly wind down, warranty tail. What it came to was this. The old company, my father's company, was carrying 20 years of warranty obligations and not much new work, and it would be cleanest, their word, for them to buy out my half and let me step back. The number on the last slide was $118,000. 9 years ago, an outfit from the cities had offered us $740,000 for the whole thing, and Denny and I hung up laughing, both of us, on the same speakerphone. I asked one question. I asked who Doyle Building Group was. Denny looked down at the paperclip he was bending and said, "That's separate, Walt. That's a different conversation." Cody said, "Take the weekend." "The number's not getting bigger." I said okay, and I took the folder home. And I could do that calmly, for one reason. They believed I was reading the first page of this story. I had already read the middle. That Sunday was my mother's 84th birthday. Pot roast at her house, the game on low in the den, the ambrosia salad with the little marshmallows that nobody admits to liking and everybody finishes. My mother told a long story about a cruise her church friends took, and Cody showed her pictures of something on his phone, and it was, and I mean this, a nice dinner. Toward the end of it, I asked Denny to step out onto the porch, and I asked him straight, because he was my brother and I owed the question one honest chance. I said, "Denny, is the district going with the new company? Is that what all of this is?" He didn't dodge it, and some part of me respects that, or has decided to call it respect. He said the trade was changing, and Cody saw it, and I didn't. He said I could be sore about the trucks getting a new name on the doors, or I could cash a check and go fishing. And when I just stood there looking at him, he reached down and got the true thing underneath all of it. He said, "You were always the help, Walt. Dad just never had the heart to tell you." Then he folded his napkin over like the discussion was a table he was clearing, and he went in for cake. I said, "Okay, Denny." That's all I said. I remember he looked almost disappointed. I think he had budgeted for a fight, and I left him standing there holding whatever he had rehearsed. I went inside, and my mother cut the cake, and I told her it was the best she'd made in years, which happened to be true. It was a brown sugar pound cake. And then I drove home the long way, past the shop, without exactly deciding to. Here is what I know about myself, and you can decide what it says about me. Somewhere between my mother's porch and my own driveway, the hurt stopped being the loudest thing in the truck. I wasn't planning anything yet. But I had stopped asking the question that goes, "How could he?" And I had started asking the question that goes, "All right, what exactly do they have, and what exactly do I have?" Those are different questions. The second one has answers. Monday morning, I told Denny the number felt low, but I wasn't going to war with family over it, and could Cody walk me through the warranty schedule sometime this week? You should have seen the relief in that room. It cost me nothing to say, and it bought me 3 quiet weeks. And I'll admit there was a piece of me, not a piece I'm proud of, that enjoyed being underestimated at that level of detail, at last, on purpose. The hardest part of those weeks wasn't Denny, and it wasn't the acting, which turned out to be nothing, since all anybody expects of a quiet man is quiet. The hardest part was the crew. The Amundsen brothers had been on our roofs 15 years, and they had hung their futures on that company, same as me, and I couldn't say a word to them. So at lunch I ate my sandwich and listened to Gary Amundsen talk about the program, 4 schools, 3 summers, how his boy might get on the crew for it, and I chewed and I said, "That'd be something, Gary. There are things in this story I'll answer for someday. That month of lunches is one of them." That Tuesday I drove 2 towns over to a lawyer named Marcia Voss with an office above the title company because I didn't want a name anybody at our end of the county would recognize in a waiting room. I put June's folder and their buyout folder on her desk, side by side, and I said, "I believe my brother is stealing my father's company, and I'd like to know exactly what he's actually getting." She read for the better part of an hour while I studied the diplomas and the dead flies in the light fixture. Then she took her glasses off, and she had the tone doctors use for an interesting x-ray. She said, "Well, they have been thorough in all the places that don't matter." She showed me. The buyout had a non-compete in it, naturally. For 5 years I was barred from soliciting the active customer accounts of Doyle and Sons Roofing as listed on Schedule B. And Schedule B was 9 names. 2 of them were restaurants that had already closed. Because for 8 months, Denny and Cody had been quietly walking every live account over to Doyle Building Group to make the old company look like a shell worth $118,000. Voss put it in one sentence. She said, "They starved the company before they asked you to sell it, so they starved your non-compete too. The school district is not on this page. You can shake their hands, take their money, and bid against them the following Monday." Then I asked her the question I had actually come to ask. I said, "Is there anything in these papers that obligates me to go on being the qualifying party for either company?" She went through it twice. There was not one word about the license in the entire agreement. Cody had drafted it off some template, and it covered the trucks and the phone number and the yard and the name, and it never mentioned the one thing the whole operation actually stood on, because he did not know what a license is. He thought it was a plaque on a wall. He had told me himself, standing in my father's office, that it was a formality. Voss laid it out like a job. 2 doors, she said. Door 1 is the old company. You sign their buyout, and after it closes, you file a 1-page withdrawal with the state, and 30 days later Doyle and Sons has no qualifying party and cannot lawfully take on a contract until it finds a new one. Door 2 is the new company. You write the licensing board a letter that says I am listed as qualifying party on an application I never signed. Here is the copy. Here is my doctor's record for the date I supposedly signed it. Here is an affidavit from the bookkeeper who kept the carbons. And then, Walt, you do the hardest thing, which is nothing. You don't call the district. You don't warn a soul. You let the record say it for you. June and I did her affidavit on a Thursday. She wore the coat she wears to funerals, and she made the young notary check her identification twice, because, she told him, "That's the whole point of you, dear." On the drive home, she asked if Emmett would have seen it coming, his own grandson. I said no, she said no, and neither of us said anything else the rest of the ride. I signed their buyout on the 17th of November in the same conference room. Cody had a pen ready for me, one of the heavy ones. While the papers went around, he mentioned they'd be keeping the family name on the trucks, Doyle Building Group, because, and this is a quote, "Names don't retire, Uncle Walt." Denny shook my hand too hard and too long, the way a man does when he's paying himself back for something, and he said, "No hard feelings." I said, "I won't carry this long." And I meant it, though not the way he took it. That same week, Cody taped a letter to the break room fridge like a kid's report card. The school district's new vendor acknowledgement, addressed to Doyle Building Group. Pending verification, it said, down in the corner, in small print. I read the small print. Then I ate my slice of the pizza they'd bought to celebrate, and I went home. The Friday before my last day, I went in early and took the stamp out of June's old top drawer and put it in my coat pocket. Nobody ever asked about it. It sits on my workbench at home now. It does not get used again by anybody. They gave me the check at closing, $118,000 for half of everything my father built. I drove to the bank, I deposited it, I had the fish fry at the wagon wheel, and I went home and slept. People ask about that part. I slept fine, better than I had in months, and I understand that says something about me, but there it is. On the 1st of December, I mailed 2 envelopes. The first went to the state. 1 page, my withdrawal as qualifying party of Doyle and Sons Roofing, effective in 30 days, the way the rule requires. The second went to the licensing board, and it was thicker, the application with my stamped signature, June's carbon, the knee doctor's records for that Tuesday in May, June's affidavit, and a cover letter that took me 4 drafts, not because it was hard to write, but because Voss kept crossing out my adjectives. The final version had no adjectives in it at all. It said what happened, in the order it happened, with the copies attached. Dad would have liked that letter. It left twice. Then it was winter, and nothing happened, which is the part nobody ever puts in these stories. I shoveled. I watched westerns. I fixed the runner on my mother's storm door and got the knee looked at again. Twice I drove past the shop without meaning anything by it, and the second time Cody's electric car was parked in Dad's old spot, charging off an extension cord run out through the office window, and I laughed most of the way home and could not have told you exactly why. 31 days after I mailed that first envelope, Doyle and Sons Roofing, my father's company, 53 years old, had no license. Nobody in that building noticed, because nobody in that building knew to look. The state doesn't send you a bouquet about it. It changes 1 line on a public website. But in bid season, at a purchasing office, 1 line on a public website is a wall. In the middle of January, Herb called me at home. He said, "Walt, I'm looking at the pre-bid list for the roof program, and there's an outfit on it called Doyle Building Group, and the state site says application under review. And Doyle and Sons is showing expired. What in the hell is going on over there?" And I gave him the only sentence Voss had cleared me to say. I said, "Herb, you should rely on the public record." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "That's a hell of a sentence, Walt." I said, "It's the only one I've got." And that was the whole conversation. The bid opening was the last Thursday in February at the district office, and I was not there, on purpose. I heard it from Herb 3 days later at the wagon wheel, over 2 plates of walleye, and I'll tell it the way he told it, because I have made him tell it more than once. The purchasing officer runs license checks right at the table. It's printed in the bid instructions, and nobody reads the bid instructions. She got to Doyle Building Group and read out, application denied January 31st, pending investigation. Then, because Cody had entered the old company as an alternate, she read that one too. Doyle and Sons Roofing, license expired December 31st, no qualifying party on file. Both bids non-responsive. Herb said Denny was there in his good coat, the camel one, and never moved at all. Cody stood up and said there had obviously been a clerical mix-up, and the purchasing officer, who Herb says did not look up from her table, said the state's records are the state's records, and went on to the next envelope. Herb put his fork down when he finished telling it, and he asked me the question I had been waiting since December for somebody to ask. He said, "Walt, whose name is on your hook these days?" And I took my new license out of my wallet because it had come in the mail that same week. Walt Doyle Roofing, LLC, qualifying party Walter E. Doyle. I set it on the table next to the tartar sauce, and Herb read it, and he laughed until people turned around in their booths. After that, things happened the way things like this happen, which is slowly, and then all at once. The board's investigation was not complicated, because the evidence was a photocopy and a calendar. In the spring, Cody signed what they call a consent order. He admitted the signature had been placed without my authorization, paid a $10,000 penalty, and agreed not to apply for, hold, or qualify a contractor's license for 5 years. The county attorney charged the filing itself as a misdemeanor, and it settled the way those things settle, with a fine, probation, and a letter from a lawyer calling it a clerical misunderstanding. The notary lost her commission. I never did learn who she was to him. The bond company was simpler than any of it. A surety will not bond an unlicensed contractor, and public work does not exist without the bond. Doyle Building Group had 4 jobs on the books that spring and finished none of them. Now, you can hire an outside qualifying party, that's legal. There are semi-retired men who rent out their license the way some men rent out a lake cabin. Denny found one, and the man wanted $110,000 a year, and then he read about the investigation and stopped returning calls. Because his license was the only thing that man owned, and the name on the license is the name on the hook. The Amundsen brothers quit in April. They called me before they had even cleaned out their lockers, and there was one piece of arithmetic from that spring I will admit I enjoyed. The warranty tale. 20 years of obligations on my father's old roofs, the very weight they had piled on the table to talk my half down to nothing. They had bought that weight from me, all of it, at closing, at their own insistence, and now the leak calls came into a company that could not lawfully send a man up a ladder. Cody had put a word for that in his slides once. Orderly. In May, Denny called my house. First time since the porch. He was friendly in the way he's friendly when a deal is dying, and he came around to it slow. Consultant title, he said. Hold the license for us, just on paper, name your number. Family is family. I let him get all the way to the end of it. Then I said, I don't think you want the help, Denny. He went quiet, and I knew he remembered the porch, and I was glad to know it traveled with him too. He started to explain himself, and I told him I had a roof in the morning, which was true, and I hung up. That's the last real conversation we've had. In August, there was an auction. I went. It was hot, there were folding chairs, and the auctioneer had that patter that turns a family's whole working life into a Tuesday afternoon. Cody came in sunglasses and left early. Denny didn't come at all. I bought one thing, Lot 47, the 1991 flatbed, the one with the doors a sign painter named Miles Decker hand-lettered before I had gray hair, Doyle and Sons Roofing. Emmett Doyle, proprietor. Miles has been dead 30 years and there is no paint like that anymore. It went for $3,600, and nobody bid against me. Town small. People knew whose truck it was. Walt Doyle Roofing ran 2 trucks that first spring, and 5 by fall, and nobody focus grouped the name. We took the district's repair and maintenance contract in March, patches and flashings and Saturday call-outs, the unglamorous end of the trade, which is the end where the trust is. And when the district rebid the re-roof program for this summer, we were 11 men, and we priced the first school honest, and we won it. Gary Amundsen's boy is on that crew, which squares one of the debts I told you about. I was up on that roof in June with my knee complaining, and from the ridge you can see the middle school where Herb and I spent that Thanksgiving in the sleet, and I will not pretend I didn't stand there a minute longer than the job required. Denny works the counter at the supply house in Ferrisburg now. Men he used to buy lunch for hand him purchase orders through a window. I don't gloat over that, and I would ask you not to either entirely. He's my brother. What I notice, the once or twice a year we end up in the same room, is that he can't find anywhere to put his eyes. Cody moved down to the cities. His page on the internet says he consults. It does not say on what. My mother turned 85 last fall. I take the flatbed over on Sundays, and she has never asked me one question about any of it, and I have never offered, and I believe each of us has decided we are protecting the other one. Maybe we are. But the first Sunday I drove Dad's truck up her street, she came out and stood on the step with her hand on the rail, and she said, "It sounds like Saturday mornings." That is everything she has ever said about it. It was plenty. If a story where the quiet one wins is what you came for, Cold Inheritance has more of them. Before you go, I'll leave you standing where he left me. Because I have stood a lot of people on that porch in my head these past 2 years. The napkin, the cake plates going around inside, your own little brother telling you what you were to your father. Would you have said something back? I have had almost 2 years to run it over, and I'll tell you where I land. I still think the cake was the right call.